So, from my understanding, you grew up in the Eastern Kentucky mountains. You're the son of a coal miner, and you had eight or nine siblings. I don't know if you were
I
including
had
yourself in the
eight.
nine. Eight
Yeah,
siblings.
I'm the youngest of nine.
Okay. How was your experience growing up with that sort of thing? And what were your favorite things to do, or do you have anything that stuck out from your childhood, or any description that you'd like to share with anybody? That sounds really interesting because I'm an only child.
Okay.
I couldn't imagine having that many brothers and
Well,
sisters.
well, the big part of our family drama is that my father was murdered when I was a year and a half old.
Wow.
And my mother, some of the kids were older by then and could help with the younger kids, but essentially she raised nine kids by herself. And that, you know, every family has a kind of mm, leading theme, and the loss of our father was the leading theme in our family history. Um, the way I look at that is instead of, you know, uh, feeling neglected and feeling like an orphan, was more that I felt proud of my mother for what she did to raise us. You know, she knew how to grow food out of the earth. She uh, knew how to collect plants from the woods to help during the times when the cupboard was bare.
Yeah.
You know, she taught us those skills of how to forage for mushrooms, and in the summertime, that was in the spring, the wild lettuce. You know, we were just really eager for that wild lettuce to come up in the forest and pasture, so we could go gather it and have salad again, and have green stuff during winter, except the canned stuff. Um, so I grew up in a subsistence agriculture, forest, and environment. And my mother had this appreciation of nature and beauty, and she taught us to appreciate that. So we loved our world in spite of the hardships. You know, the beauty of the snow and the violence of the storms, and occasionally we could see the northern lights or something like that. She taught us to appreciate nature. And there was always a savage side to that, like when there was a flood and it would actually destroy people's homes and lives. We had all that kind of drama. But well, I also got to do things that a lot of urban children never get to experience. You know, um, when I was 8 or so, my mother taught me how to take care of the lettuce bed. So I was in charge of lettuce. That gave me responsibility. That influenced my character. And then, by the time I was 12, I was in charge of the watermelon patch. You know, I graduated, I was learning work skills. And I saw inner city kids who didn't have that, and where in the hell you're going to get a work ethic if as a child you don't have the satisfaction of that kind of work and responsibility experience. So there were and there was the hard work and hot sun, but my mother took care of us. She wouldn't let us work in the noon sun. You know, that was the time to get in the shade.
Mm.
Some of our neighbors, the kids had to work in the hot sun.
Jeez.
So and another part of my childhood that was really helpful when I came out into the larger world is we were literate. Um, the Eastern Kentucky public school system was just barely developing in my childhood in the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
And I attended one-room schools until we moved closer to town. And that I was like 13 years old when that happened. And we walked a couple of miles to and from school. But that was also fun, because we joined together with neighbor kids and walked the 2 miles,
Hmm.
and we had fun on the way. And we also got new shoes when it was time for school to start. So we had, and we learned to make our own toys. When it was time to make a sled, somehow I managed to put that together myself, and then you could ride it in the snow. Um, I made my own wagon, with wooden wheels, and so um, my attitude to all of that is, and to my relationship with, I spent a lot of time alone in the forest, and some people would consider that neglect. I bonded with the forest, and it was my world, and I felt, sense of empowerment. But I've spent part of my childhood on 160 acres. It didn't belong to us, but it belonged to my brother. But I had a kingdom, and then there were other acres beyond that that nobody else lived in. So what world, that I could explore. Um, so I consider that a good childhood.
Yeah, I
I
think kids,
and
kids.
and my when I was little, my older sisters would, for example, rock me when I needed to be rocked, and help my mother look after me. And that was positive. And my brothers did looking after me as well. They made sure, for example, when it was time for me to have the rite of passage of learning to use a gun, a rifle, that they took me out in the woods, showed me how to use a rifle. They knew I didn't want to kill anything, and they
Yeah.
didn't make me kill anything, but they put me through the rite of passage so that throughout the rest of my life, I would have that experience of knowing how to use a gun. In fact, or needed to use a gun, I'd be able to. And I passed that on to my own children. So a lot of people don't understand Appalachians and guns, but if you live with nature, there are wild animals and there are wild people who need to be killed.
Yeah, that's the real problems of people, isn't it? But yeah, I just recently started getting into guns. I kind of shot some with my father, but now that I'm kind of at a more adult age, I'm learning about it in my free time as a hobby and stuff like that. I have an AR-15 that I bought last summer under my bed, but I'll cut that part out of the interview. But
I know we can't talk about this to our progressive friends.
yeah,
They I was at a luncheon with the Episcopal Peace Fellowship leadership once, and I made the mistake of mentioning that my family was into guns. I learned never do that again.
yeah, I don't know. They want to say all the police are corrupt, but then nobody should have their own guns. So I'm like, well, should only the police have them? I don't know. I like guns. I agree with some rules on them, but
Oh
overall, I
yeah,
like them.
you should you should keep them locked up and away from children and all that stuff. I haven't taught. I didn't teach my grandson or turn over rifles to him because his dad objected. But one of my sons recently took him out and taught him how to shoot, and he gets past.
Yeah, it's crazy. My AR-15, it doesn't have any recoil or bump or anything. It just you can shoot a lot of bullets really quickly, and I don't know. It's kind of weird how shotgun, it kicks up and it's this big dramatic thing, but the AR-15 is not like that. So it's a pretty powerful gun. But anyways, kind of that was off topic.
I know.
Right. Okay, so we talked about your birth date and where you grew up, and kind of the things you enjoyed growing up. Um, where are your parents' families from, and have you ever been there? And could you describe how they've described it?
Um, my um, my father's family came from the North Carolina mountains, at the end of the Revolutionary War. Our ancestor in North Carolina had fought in the war, got a land grant, but I guess North Carolina was getting too crowded, and so, like a lot of other people, they migrated on foot and on horseback to eastern Kentucky, and that ancestor founded the community of Maloney in Lee County, Kentucky. So my father's people were rooted in Lee County, Wolfe County, and Breathitt County. And I hadn't been to Maloney until about 10 years ago. Phil Obermiller made me go look for it. I had never been there. It's hard to get to. And to get to it, we had to drive along the railroad track because we didn't trust the road for my Jeep, even for my Jeep. Anyhow, I've been to Maloney, Kentucky, and other places that the Maloneys are from in those three counties, Lee, Breathitt, and Wolfe. And my mother's people came from Virginia into eastern Kentucky. All this was around 1805, right after the Revolutionary War. So they were among the second wave of white settlers on both sides. Well, not exactly first families of Kentucky, but second wave. So anyhow, I've been to the places where my mother grew up in Carter County, Kentucky. And what happened to them then is when opportunities in coal mining in West Virginia opened up, both the Maloneys and the Kleins, my grandparents on both sides, moved to the West Virginia coal fields. And but I wasn't born in West Virginia. During the Depression, both parents moved back to Breathitt County, and my parents and grandparents and Uncle Marvin and his wife created a settlement of log cabins. This was like 1934 during the Depression, and I was born in that little settlement in Breathitt County, not in Maloney, where the family had originated, but in a place called Spencer Bend in Breathitt County, right where those three counties that I mentioned come together. Mm. Did I answer the whole question? Yes, where they came from, and have I been there? I think, and yeah, and so I still do some heritage tourism. You know, I not only visit, I look for long lost cousins, and I visit the library in Breathitt County. Has family histories for that whole Tri-County area and beyond. They're kind of a regional genealogy archive. So my husband and I spent some time there looking for Maloney related stuff. We find a good bit of material.
Interesting. Okay. So did your family ever describe themselves as Appalachian or mountain people or something like that? Or like, was it something they were aware of and embraced, or was it just more of like not something they thought or talked too much about, or was it definitely like an identity that was a prevalent theme?
My mother taught us that we lived in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So I had a family that knew where we lived, and my mother was ambivalent toward that. You know, she was half indigenous Appalachian and half influenced by the missionaries who came in to save us from savagery or whatever. The missionary part of her made her ashamed, you know, and she would talk about moving out to civilization. But when she moved out to civilization, like South Lebanon, Ohio, or Lebanon, Ohio. She wanted to go back. So she loved the mountains. And and she, um, with that ambivalence of, it was, her life was hard as well as joyful. And the part of her, um, she had to experience her children being ill and not being able to get a doctor. I almost died at least once for lack of medical care. And one of my sisters, barely got to the hospital in time. The hospital was 50 miles away, and part of that had to be mule back, and it was a nightmare. Well, so that her ambivalence about living in the mountains was legitimate. It was based on the terror of that kind of experience. But she taught me things like, we would be walking through the forest, and she would say the forest were men's first temples. So she taught me that we were in a sacred place. So there was a spiritual element. I'm saying that was part of the identity that she built into me. The words were just beginning to be shaped, and then the other part of my growing awareness of Appalachian identity would be letters from my sister who had moved to Cincinnati, and she would tell me that our people were called hillbillies and briar hoppers. And so I was getting the idea that being from the mountains did make us different. And when I got to the University of Kentucky, the priest at the Newman Club pulled me aside one day, and he said he saw the strain that I was in, trying to meet the expectations of the bluegrass people around me. They rode horses and, had aristocratic identities and stuff like that. And my boss in my part-time job was really teaching me not to associate with my own family or people from my home area. That, I should be like her and her people and bluegrass people. So the priest saw what was happening to me, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Michael, I think you should give some thought to what it means that you're from the mountains." And my mind just exploded. I had been given permission. So I've spent my life since then giving people permission to think about what it means that they're from the mountains. And that was very liberating for me. That gave me some defense against the people who were trying to separate me from my family and from my friends and from where I was from. So
Yeah, I like that. That was a nice, powerful story. That was cool.
Right.
Yeah, so your mother was she liked the region, but was ambivalent. But then when she moved away, she wanted to move back. That's interesting. So she was preferred what she knew.